Did you know that your sense of agency helps you to be psychologically stable? Why? Because often the environment is unstable. You know, there's an African proverb that says you can't tame the wind, but you can turn your sails. And so in an environment where it is windy and the weather is hard and the external circumstances are difficult, that sense of agency internally, remember that internal locus of control causes you to go through life and say, of course I don't determine the weather, but I determine my response. And this is an absolute game changer. Agency is your very own power. It's your ability to affect, I didn't say control, but to affect the future. Hey everybody, welcome back to our next episode. We're going to be continuing our conversation around creating healthy workplace culture. And here at Flourishing Workplace, our mission is changing the world by changing the workplace. And so in our last episode, I talked about the fact that I had a conversation with an HR professional by the name of Julie, who literally said to me one day, as we were talking about her work environment, she said, I'm 100% sure that I can't keep going on like this. And even if I could go on, I don't even think I would go on. And what was she talking about? She was talking about a toxic workplace. And she was talking about the idea of a toxic workplace where people were being demotivated, they were being demoralized, they were being wounded, and they were being hurt. And so I believe, and we talked about this last week, that the ultimate solution to a toxic workplace is a flourishing workplace. And that is where we want to sort of take the conversation now. We want to spend the next several episodes talking about creating a healthy workplace. And why is it going to take us several episodes to do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because creating a healthy workplace, though it's not rocket science, is actually more difficult than it sounds. Creating a healthy, flourishing work environment is not just going to be about doing what we've always done. Because if we do what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always gotten. And so when it comes to creating a healthy workplace, a flourishing workplace, what we actually want to do is begin doing different things. We want to get out of our comfort zone and we want to step into new ways of being, new ways of doing. And so I want to begin by talking about traits of people. And there's actually 10 of them that I'm actually going to cover over the next 10 episodes. We're going to be talking about 10 traits of people who create a flourishing workplace culture. Okay. In other words, and this is really interesting because when we talk about a toxic workplace, so many people just sort of assume like the system. It's like this big thing, the system, it's crushing my soul, the system, the toxic workplace, and people rail against the system and they want to tear the system down. But here's the reality. Every single one of us are both victims of and contributors to the system. Did you know that? Right? And I know that might be almost a politically incorrect thing to say, but it's actually true. A system is nothing more or less than the contributions of all the members of that system. Now, of course, somebody set the system up. It wasn't typically one person. Often it was several people. But every day in a dynamic system, in a system that's still alive, I have the opportunity to contribute to that system. Now, if you're in a dead system, then I got some advice. Get out. Get into a dynamic system, a system that's still alive. Because as long as there's life in the system, there's a hope to change it. But if the system is dead, well, then you can't change it. The only thing you can do is bury it and go create a new one. But whether you're in a new system that you're creating or one that's still alive, that you're seeking to improve, I'll tell you what, every one of us has the opportunity to feed into a healthy workplace system, a culture, a healthy workplace culture, a flourishing workplace culture. And so what are the traits of the people who actually do that? The first trait of people who contribute to a flourishing or a healthy workplace culture is personal empowerment. Personal empowerment. Now, you might be saying, well, what can a sense of personal empowerment do for a person who's in the workplace? And I want to tell you that it can do everything for people. Now, I want you to imagine you got Joe in cubicle 1 and you got Sally in cubicle 2, just to use an example. And let's say again, I know we talked about Joe and Sally in our last episode, and they kind of have roughly the same resume, roughly the same background, roughly the same IQ, roughly the same experience. But imagine that Joe comes to work every day and he feels disempowered. He feels like a victim. He feels like everybody's treating him horribly, and he feels like he literally can't ever do anything that's going to break the mold or the challenge that he's facing. And then I want you to imagine Sally, and she comes to work every day and she feels empowered. She feels motivated. She feels like she's got I got this sort of mentality. I mean, which of those two people will actually create healthy or flourishing workplace culture? Well, obviously Sally. And why is that? Well, because people with an external locus of control, what that means is my life is governed by external forces completely outside of my control. I'm just a buoy on the ocean being tossed back and forth. I literally have no control over anything that I'm experiencing. I'm just sitting here, kind of the victim of everything else. Did you know that people with an external locus of control are way more likely to be ineffectual, depressed, hopeless, and anxious? Okay, so ineffectual, depressed, hopeless, and anxious. And so if I shift that to people who have an internal locus of control, and that is a sense of agency. And you might say, well, what is a sense of agency? That means that you believe that you're an active agent in the construction of your own destiny. Okay, so I'm not just sitting here waiting for the boss to come along and give me a promotion. I'm not just waiting for the economy to change. I'm not just waiting for a change in government or whatever it is, but I am an active agent on the daily in the construction of my own destiny. Did you know that these people, according to the research, are much more likely to be hopeful, and they're less likely to be depressed and anxious, and they are way more likely to be effective and successful than the people who have an external locus of control. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about personal empowerment. The word that the psychologists use for this is agency. Now, agency is the sense of control that you feel in your own life. It is your capacity to influence your own thoughts and behavior, and to have faith in your ability to handle a wide range of situations and circumstances. And that's what a person of agency has. They say, well, I don't control everything, but I control my thoughts. I control my behaviors. I control my belief system. I control my attitude. I control all of these things. And so I am going to use the things that I can control to manage the things that I can't or that I don't. And that way, I'm operating out of a sense of agency. Did you know that your sense of agency helps you to be psychologically stable? Why? Because often the environment is unstable. You know, there's an African proverb that says you can't tame the wind, but you can turn your sails. And so in an environment where it is windy and the weather is hard and the external circumstances are difficult, that sense of agency internally, remember that internal locus of control causes you to go through life and of course I don't determine the weather, but I determine my response. And this is an absolute game changer. Agency is your very own power. It's your ability to affect, I didn't say control, but to affect the future. Here's the question. Are you the producer of your life circumstances or just the product of them? This is really, really important. Are you co-creating your destiny, or are you just a mindless drone, like going with the flow? I actually heard it said one time, a guy said to me, the only thing that goes with the flow is a dead fish. And I know that's kind of crude, but it's actually kind of true. If you see a dead fish floating on the river, he just kind of goes with the flow. But the fish that's alive, often they will go against the current. They will fight the circumstances around them to create the destination that they're looking to. Did you know that you have way more power than you think? Now, this is so important. I know that everything out there, especially, with the social media landscape and society and the media, they want to tell you your life is horrible, that everything is crashing in on you, that you can't control anything, you can't improve anything, you can't make anything better. But all of that is a lie. You have more power than you think. Doesn't mean you can control everything, What it does mean is that there's a whole set of things that you can control. So how do I develop this sense of agency, this sense of personal empowerment? The first thing that I've got to do is I've got to be intentional about it. I have to recognize that I may lack agency today, and so I'm intentional about creating it. Now, if you're like me and you were raised in a chaotic environment where there wasn't a lot of stability and there was a lot of trauma and there was a lot of strange things going on, ups and downs and ins and outs and chaos and moving out. I mean, I think I counted one time, by the time I was 16, I had moved like 32 times or something like that. So there was not a lot of opportunity to have that sense of internal agency. And when I got out of that environment and began to create my own, I had to recognize this agency thing is going to be a problem for me. So I'm going to be intentional. The second thing that I have to do is I need to be goal-oriented. If I want to create agency, I need to be goal-oriented. I got to stop saying, well, I don't control the economy and I don't control interest rates. I don't control this. I don't control that. No. Set your goals. Did you know that setting goals gives you a 43% advantage in achieving them? So if you want to be 43% more effective in achieving a goal, then it starts by you setting a goal. And when you set that goal, it needs to be clear. It needs to be written down. It needs to be not so high that it's going to overwhelm you. And when you set specific and yet challenging goals, it will actually lead you to perform at a 90% higher rate. Now that's amazing. I mean, anything that can give you a 90% increase in your sense and your ability to perform is worth tapping into, and that is goal setting. The third thing that we need to do to develop agency is simply be adaptive. And I've been using this little guy as my favorite example lately. And this is a little, 2.5 inch ball. And I don't know, it's, I guess, made out of sponge or something like that. You can pick it up in Amazon. And this thing here, it's like less than $1. I mean, it's literally pennies. And, this little guy here, in comparison to this, my beautiful iPhone, I don't even know what edition I have, but whatever it is, I mean, this thing here, it's probably $1,200. This thing here is less than $1. I could not take this thing up 15 feet and drop it on the ground and not have it shatter and not have it damaged. This thing here, I could drop it from a jetliner 35,000 feet in the air. And guess what? This thing is going to continue to bounce back. A lot of us, here's the problem. We want to be like this sophisticated iPhone, walking around, all perfect. Everything in my life is great. And the problem with that, nothing wrong with being sophisticated, but there's no resilience in sophistication. There's very little. Whereas this guy here is unbelievably resilient. So I'm not saying be one or the other. What I'm saying is go ahead and be your sophisticated self, but make sure you are adaptive. Make sure that you are resilient. Make sure if you're building agency that you have the ability to roll with the punches. Make sure when you have agency that you're not so wedded and married to your outcome that every time that outcome doesn't happen the way that you want, that you take your toys and go home. Make sure that you have the ability to adapt and change and go with the flow. Really, really important. I don't mean like a dead fish would go with the flow, but sometimes what you have to do is you got to adapt. The fourth thing that will help you to develop that sense of agency and that sense of personal empowerment is to be self-aware. You've got to understand your emotion. You got to understand your triggers. You got to know yourself. Aristotle said knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And Lao Tzu said knowing others is intelligence, but knowing yourself is true wisdom. And so if you want to create agency in your life, the first thing you've got to do is you got to be intentional. The second thing is you got to be goal-oriented. What is your goal? Why don't you think about that? Number 3, be adaptive. And number 4, be self-aware. And what does that have to do with creating a flourishing workplace culture? It has everything to do with it, because if you are personally empowered, if you're coming into that workplace every day with agency, you're not looking around complaining about what you don't have. You're actually contributing to a positive work environment and creating and leaning in and building the kind of workplace that you want, because you are intentional, because you are setting goals, because you are adaptive, and because, of course, you are self-aware. Now, at Flourishing Workplace, we believe in workplaces where everyone thrives, everyone belongs, and everyone contributes. And let me promise you, we can help you create a flourishing workplace. All you have to do is go to flourishingworkplace.com. Your next steps there would be to book a discovery session. You can book a no cost, no obligation discovery session, literally just like that. And when you book that session, what's going to happen is we're going to listen to you. We're going to learn from you. We're going to understand what you're going through. And then we're going to provide you with a detailed roadmap for getting from where you are as a workplace to a flourishing workplace, which I know is where you want to be. And I'll tell you what, we will walk with you to implement. And so please, friends, go to flourishingworkplace.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you for our next episode.